People say parents can sacrifice everything for their children. I did that, gathered my late wife's insurance money, sold all the land we had saved, and bought $1 million yacht, simply because I knew my daughter loved the sea. But in my son-in-law's eyes, I was just a poor old bus driver renting a boat to show off. And the most painful thing was that my own daughter believed him. If you have ever felt looked down on by your own family, leave a comment below and don't forget to follow the channel, because every story here is a reminder that justice appears when few expect it. The wind off Seattle's bay carried a morning chill, but Darren's words burned in my chest. Pretty handy there, huh, Edward? A school bus driver knows how to fix a stainless steel faucet on a yacht? Maybe renting this whole boat came with a free plumber. He let out a hollow laugh, loud enough for the entire marina to hear. I caught a few people on the pier turning to stare at Aurora's deck. Melissa flushed and dropped her head, pretending to adjust her purse strap rather than face me. His parents heard it too. Charles frowned while Sarah forced a smile to let it pass, but only Darren looked pleased, as if he had placed me in the lowest spot. I straightened up, the rag for salty oil still smelling of metal in my hand. 40 years of driving a bus had taught me how to endure, how to swallow anger so the kids wouldn't panic when they squabbled loudly on the bus. But this time was different, because I knew Darren's contempt hadn't just sprung up today. It had been smoldering for years. I remembered clearly the night Melissa asked me to pick her up at the mansion of one of Darren's college friends. I had just finished my bus shift, hadn't changed out of my uniform, yellow chalky dust from the school bus still on my jacket. The moment I stepped into the yard, keys jingling, Darren's friends burst out laughing. One guy twisted his face and said, "Hey Darren, is that your Uber?" And another squinted and taunted, "No, it's a school bus. Did your future father-in-law bring the entire high school team?" Snickers and clinking glasses echoed through the living room. I saw Darren then, face blazing, eyes unfocused, lips pressed tight. That night, he said nothing to me, just silently led Melissa to the car, his gaze icy. From that moment, I knew I had become a thorn in his eye, a poor rustic bus driver who had accidentally made him the butt of a joke among wealthy friends. Since then, he had clutched that humiliation inside, releasing it drop by drop whenever he could. And today, right on Aurora's deck, he tried to recreate that feeling, only this time on purpose. He wanted to turn me into a clown before my own family to wash away the old shame. I drew a deep breath, salt soaking my lungs, Seattle sunlight glittering on the water, lighting up the hull. I turned and slowly faced Darren. For a brief instant, I saw him start, the confident smile cracking. I spoke low and even, each word scraping like metal. "Darren, you can mock me because I used to drive a bus, because my hands are more used to tightening bolts than holding champagne. But don't forget, from that very day you showed your true nature. It wasn't your friend's laughter that made you lose face. It was the way you chose to nurse a grudge against an old man who raised the woman you love." The deck went silent. Melissa went rigid. Charles and Sarah were stunned. And Darren squinted, the sneer freezing on his lips. I knew I had touched the wound he most wanted to hide, and this time I would not stay silent. Seattle Marina in the morning looked half real, half dream. A thin mist stretched over the water, turning the straight masts into shimmering shadows, a distant horn mixing with gulls, and the soft slap of waves against the hull. Aurora stood tall in the berth, her white body reflecting the first light, a quiet affirmation of the months I had prepared. Every detail had been carefully set. The dining table in the main cabin laid with white porcelain rimmed in silver, crystal glasses glittering under warm yellow light, napkins folded neatly, and on the deck a bottle of Oregon wine I had kept in the hold. I am not rich or stylish, but I believe care, sincerity, and family feeling create an atmosphere money alone cannot buy. When I heard Melissa complain a few months ago that if only there were somewhere to escape the pressure, my heart clenched. My daughter had been living under strain, pressed by work and by marriage, her eyes always tired. The moment I heard that, I decided to create a refuge for her, a place where she would feel she still had a home, still had a father ready to shelter her. Aurora was my answer to that wish, not only a yacht, but a symbol of a father-daughter bond, and of the hope that after years apart, we would find each other again. I had pictured this day dozens of times. Melissa stepping onto the deck, eyes bright with surprise, laughter bursting with happiness, hugging me and exclaiming, "Dad, you're amazing." Then weekend trips, father and daughter on the deck watching sunsets, me showing her how to read the brass compass I cherish, her telling me her plans, and perhaps, in some moment, she would see that this bus driver father was not a burden or an outdated shadow, but the one solid support she always had. This morning, as I tightened each screw and wiped each grain of salt from the rail, my heart pounded like my first day behind the wheel. A lifetime of driving had trained me to keep time, hit the stops, and deliver the kids safely. Today was the same. I was driving the most important route of my life, the route to bring my daughter back to her father. Everything I prepared was not to show off, much less to prove wealth or poverty, but only so my girl would feel she was never alone. I hoped the small celebration on Aurora would be like the long hug I had missed with her for years, but when I heard Darren's jeer and saw Melissa lower her eyes, my heart sank. The script in my head, the happy smile, the tearful relief, shattered like waves on the hull. I still kept my voice even. I think the whole family will enjoy spending time together on this boat. But inside I heard a storm forming. Darren did not understand, and the most painful thing was that Melissa did not either. They saw only an old bus driver reaching for extravagance. They did not see that my whole heart was laid here. I set my hand lightly on the brass compass on the table, its north-pointing needle trembling like a sigh. In Seattle's gray haze, I told myself it was not too late. The journey had only just begun. Leather soles thudded on the wooden gangway as Darren stepped onto the deck first, moving like the yacht's true owner. His eyes swept the space, fingers stroking the leather seats, tapping the console with a connoisseur's air like a picky customer inspecting goods, rather than an invited guest. A crooked smile showed as he leaned on the rail, eyes gleaming with the glee of someone who thinks he holds control. Right after came Melissa, gripping her purse strap, stepping like a tightrope walker, each step stiff, eyes deliberately avoiding mine. She looked confused, both embarrassed and uneasy, as if afraid her father's gaze would stir up something she did not want to face. I felt the invisible distance between us, a gap I had tried to bridge with Aurora, but now deepened by Darren's presence. Charles and Sarah came last, carrying the composure of a long-married middle-class couple. Charles looked around, eyes bright, his voice warm. "This is wonderful, Edward." "This is a boat to admire," and Sarah smiled kindly and nodded. "I've never seen an interior so refined. You truly have an eye for it." Those words were a cool stream, but before I could answer, Darren cut in, his tone sour. "I bet Aurora ate up quite a lot. You're not going to say you bought it, are you? Seattle is so expensive. Maybe you mortgaged that little house in Tacoma to rent the boat for a few days?" His laugh slipped out right after, an oily sound sharp enough to slice the warmth we had just found. Melissa bit her lip, but stayed silent. No protest, no defense. My chest tightened, but I kept steady. I just think the family deserves some comfortable time together. And Charles's brow pinched while Sarah glanced at her husband. Torn, yet Darren kept on like a man who had won a hand, his contemptuous eyes flicking between me and my daughter. In a heartbeat, Aurora, the gift I had prepared out of love and hope, was no longer a place of reunion, but a stage where I was forced to play the poor clown, while Darren played the superior. I gripped the teak rail, its smooth cold beneath my palm. Aurora's dining cabin glowed under soft golden light, the glossy walnut table reflecting crystal sparkle. I had prepared since morning, lemon roasted salmon fragrant from the oven, vegetables seasoned and cooked just to tender, Oregon white wine resting in an ice bucket, each napkin folded precisely atop silver-rimmed plates. That table, to me, was where family would share. No barriers, no distance. When everyone sat, I poured the wine and set each plate before them, quietly hoping that with a few seconds of silence, every gaze would soften. Sarah gasped softly. "Oh, my Edward, you truly put your heart into this. It looks delicious just to see it." Charles nodded, his face lit with respect. But before any of it could sink in, Darren burst out laughing, lifting his glass high, his voice slicing the warmth we had just kindled. "To family, adventures we can't afford. Cheers!" The clink of glass sounded, but it was cold and hollow. Melissa winced slightly, then still raised her glass to tap, her lips trembling. I looked at my daughter and clearly saw hesitation in her eyes, the strained smile of someone trying to dodge her husband's anger. Charles set his glass down hard, a warning spark in his eyes. "Darren!" Sarah gripped her husband's hand, trying to keep him seated, but it was clear she was embarrassed and confused too. I sat there with my hands on the table, unmoving. 40 years of driving a bus, I had heard every kind of yelling, bickering and teasing from kids, and I was used to holding back. But in this moment, I felt more humiliated than when I was stuck behind the wheel, in a blizzard, while a whole bus of students yelled because we were late. I could hear every blade Darren drove in. He tore off a piece of salmon, lifted it to his mouth, then chewed slowly, his tone dripping contempt. "Gotta admit, the bus driver can cook. I guess when you have all day free, you find something to fill the time, huh?" Sarah drew a sharp breath, but said nothing. Melissa swallowed quickly, eyes on her plate, as if she wanted to sink into the floor. Charles arched an eyebrow, his jaw tightening, but I laid my hand on the table to signal him gently not to interfere. I did not want to turn the meal into a shouting match. I only wanted to look Darren straight on, so he would see that his words would not break me, only gather into a storm in my chest. I lightly touched the brass compass at the head of the table, its north-pointing needle trembling under my finger. In the taut silence, I thought, he has no idea how dangerous a game he's playing. My finger still rested on the brass compass, and the gleam of the metal carried my mind back to that fateful day at Lake Union, where a stretch of luxury yacht showrooms lined up, hulls glittering as if daring ordinary folks to step inside. That day I wore a faded bus driver jacket, still scented faintly with machine oil. The salesperson frowned when he saw me, probably thinking the old man was lost, but I did not care. I walked to Aurora with my heart shaking like the day I received my first school bus. I had counted every dollar, carefully in my head. After Margaret passed, the insurance company paid me $900,000, a sum we had never wanted to receive. In addition, when we were young, my wife and I had managed to buy 3 lots on the outskirts of Kent, Washington, each only about $35,000, because back then the area was just fields and old warehouses. We planned to retire there one day, garden, and build a wooden house, but the plan never happened. Margaret fell ill, and everything turned to smoke. After her funeral, I stood over the land deeds and cried. Yet life can be strange. These past few years, Kent was zoned for new commercial and residential developments. Small tech companies popped up, and the highway expanded. Those lots shot up in price, from $35,000 to $600,000 each. I sold all 3, taking in $1.8 million. Adding the insurance and the savings scraped from a bus driver's pay over 40 years, about $500,000 in a retirement fund, and odd stocks. In total, I had nearly $3.2 million. That was enough for me to sign a check for $1.45 million for Aurora, a 42-foot yacht, both elegant and reasonable, with a glossy white fiberglass hull, a spacious bedroom, and a cozy cabin. Most importantly, after buying it, I still had nearly $1.8 million left for old age, medicine, and not depending on anyone. The salesman was momentarily stunned when the real check sat in the hands of an old bus driver. He immediately changed his tone, sweet as syrup, but I did not need the flattery. In my eyes there was only Melissa, the little girl who once loved the sea and sand. I remember perfectly that afternoon when she was 6, standing by the bay at ocean shores, her small feet pressing wet sand, her eyes lighting up at the surge of waves. She ran toward the water and shouted, "Daddy, I want a boat to go forever on this sea." I held her and laughed, thinking it was just a child's dream. But that image never left me, and when Margaret was gone, I understood. It was time to make that memory real. Aurora was not for show, and it certainly was not to boast. It was the gift I wanted to give my daughter, so she would remember that in a life full of waves, her father was there, ready to bring her back to her purest joy. I signed the check, my pen firm as if setting down my whole heart. When I left the showroom in my old pickup, I felt as light as if I were driving my first route again. Aurora was not just a yacht. It was proof that a bus driver can save for a lifetime to create a miracle for his family. That lunch on Aurora should have been a warm reunion. May sunlight poured through the big window onto the table I had painstakingly prepared. Salmon roasted with lemon sauce, vegetables fragrant from the grill, chilled Oregon white wine. I wanted that meal to open a string of good memories on this new boat, a floating home where my family could mend. But a heavy silence blanketed the cabin. Darren tapped his spoon against the wine glass, a smirk hovering on his lips. "Nice work, Edward." He deliberately used the Cold Street name. Fancy food doesn't make a man less poor, not when he lives on a pension and rents a boat like this. His words hit my ears like drops of acid. I meant to ignore it, but Charles, Darren's father, frowned and set down his knife. "Darren, that's enough." Sarah, his mother, shook her head as well, but he only shrugged and went on. "I'm just telling the truth. An old bus driver plays a rich captain. If that isn't delusion, what is?" I felt my hand tremble on the knife handle, but worse was when Melissa spoke softly, yet clearly. "Darren only worries about the family, about the future, Dad." That line was a cold blade straight through my chest. She did not meet my eyes. She just stared at the untouched salmon, twisting her purse strap on the chair by reflex. In that moment, I could no longer hear the waves outside the bay, only my own heart pounding. Since when had all my love become a burden that forced her to defend a man like Darren? I remembered all the nights I picked Melissa up from campus, bone-tired after a 12-hour bus shift, but still smiling when I saw her clutching her books. I remembered the day she graduated, how I stood behind the barrier, with oil still on my hands, because I did not dare push to the crowd of parents, in suits and silk dresses. I had thought she would understand, but today her averted eyes answered everything. Darren leaned back, sipped wine, and taunted, "See? Even my wife agrees. You should listen to the young and learn how to manage money, or you'll lose it all." I looked at my daughter, hoping for a shake of the head, a correction. But no, Melissa only bit her lip and stayed silent. In the warm noon light, her face suddenly seemed distant, as if an ocean lay between us that no bridge could cross. I sat still, my hands clenched into fists under the table. It was not anger, but a deep hollowness, as if a lifetime of sacrifice had been brushed away with a single nod from my only child. The meal stumbled on in awkward quiet. Charles and Sarah tried now and then to compliment the dishes, but each word dropped into a cold void. I ate without tasting, hearing only the faint clink of cutlery, like a hammer striking my heart. When the meal ended, Darren stood and lifted his glass. "Here's to a fun weekend on the water, and to the hope that the old man will be more sensible with his financial decisions from now on." He stressed sensible with triumph. Melissa did not stop him. She only bowed her head, gripping her water glass, saying nothing. I gave a thin smile, but inside, a whole world collapsed. In that instant, I understood. Darren was not only stealing my respect in front of the family, he was inch by inch stealing my daughter's heart. And Melissa, knowingly or not, was letting him. That afternoon, after the awkward lunch, I used the anchor system as an excuse to step out for air. Waves lapped softly against Aurora, and the late sun lay gold across the water. It should have been peaceful, but inside me, there was only weight. I had just stepped onto the deck when I heard a clatter below, the sound of metal, not someone clearing dishes. My heart dropped. I knew Darren had left the table before me. I moved quietly to the hatch and peeked in. In the dim light, his figure was crouched near the galley in the utility bay, something bright in his hand, pliers or a wrench. He did not know there were security cameras, so he moved as if inspecting merchandise he owned. I clearly saw him deliberately torque a water line hard, then tap at the gas shutoff valve. Those were not accidents. He looked up, glanced around, then sneered and muttered just loud enough to carry in the echo. "Let's see how long the poor bus driver plays, Captain." He wiped away traces with a rag and even neatly put things back as if untouched. I turned away before he looked up, my hand clenching the deck rail, veins standing out. Everything was already clear. Darren was not only humiliating me with words, he wanted to sabotage Aurora, the living proof of my love for Melissa, to turn me into a helpless old man who couldn't even keep a yacht in working order. That evening, while the family sat on deck enjoying the sea breeze, Darren suddenly became unusually enthusiastic, pouring wine for Charles and Sarah, then casually saying loudly, "I just checked the system down in the galley. Looks like the water valve is about to fail. That's the risk when you rent a boat. One breakdown, and who knows if you'll have to pay for it. And when you call a repairman, I wonder if the father-in-law has enough money to cover it." His voice hanging half joking, half serious, each word slapping me in the face. Melissa frowned, then turned to me and said gently, "Dad, Darren's just worried. Really, if it breaks, it'll be expensive." And I looked at her, my heart sinking. She still thought this was only a rented yacht, still believed the script Darren had staged. Charles and Sarah exchanged a quick look. They said nothing, but the discomfort was plain on their faces. Perhaps they were starting to feel their son had gone too far. I forced a thin smile, but inside everything was clear. Darren was deliberately sabotaging things so I would have to pay, turning me into a pathetic joke who couldn't shoulder a luxury pastime. When night fell, I sat alone in the helm cabin watching the security cameras on the monitor. I had invested in them beforehand, a habit learned from years of seeing bad actors on bus routes. I rewound the day's footage, and there it was. Darren bent over, deliberately twisting the water valve until the metal squealed, then wiping the grime with a cloth, evidence that could not be denied. I leaned back and drew a long breath. Darren's game had crossed the line, but instead of acting at once, I hit the button to back up the clip to an external hard drive and slipped it into my jacket pocket. Over several decades of life, I had learned one thing. The more confident an enemy grows, the more he exposes himself. And this time, Darren would destroy himself with his own arrogance. Up on deck, he was still laughing with Melissa, throwing his arm around her as if he had just won. But he had no idea that every move he made today had been recorded second by second, and I, the poor old bus driver in his eyes, was preparing for the final move. The next morning, before the sun could chase the chill off the bay, I was already awake. I had barely slept. The image of Darren twisting the water valve, replaying frame by frame in my head. The external drive holding the video weighed in my pocket, like a stone keeping my heartbeat steady again. I knew that evidence was enough to unmask him on the spot. But deep down, I also knew that if I moved too soon, he would deny it, and Melissa, my daughter, might still blindly take his side. No, I needed him to dig the hole deeper, so everyone could see it with their own eyes. As I brewed coffee on deck, Darren came out with a bright face as if he owned Aurora. He stretched and patted the shining rail. Pretty, Edward, but renting fancy stuff is a pain. When things break, it's just money out the door, he said loudly enough for both Melissa and Charles and Sarah to hear. Sarah frowned. Darren, must you bring up money every time you open your mouth? But he only shrugged. I'm just looking out for my father-in-law. When old people hit financial trouble, it's dangerous. And that made Melissa nod slightly and say softly, Dad, Darren has a point. If this boat really breaks, I'm afraid you'll have to pay a lot. I set down the coffee cup, pressed the ache in my chest flat, and answered calmly, Right. Whoever breaks it pays for it. And I looked straight at Darren. For a moment his eyes snagged. Then he quickly smirked as if nothing had happened. All that day I let him roam freely around Aurora. Charles and Sarah sat on deck reading. Melissa rested in the main cabin, and I pretended to be busy with the compass and the charts, when in fact my eyes were glued to the small monitor tied to the cameras, tracking his every move. Just as expected, he kept sneaking open the utility cabinet, fiddling with the electrical panel, even tapping at the generator system. Every action was recorded clearly. Toward evening, when Melissa invited everyone up to watch the sunset, Darren suddenly played the helpful man. How about I check the entire system tonight, just to be safe? I worked with electrical and plumbing engineers on an old project, so I've got a little experience. His words sounded caring, while his eyes flashed with calculation. Charles cleared his throat, impatient. Son, don't turn this trip into an inspection. This is a vacation. And Darren smiled, obviously annoyed at the lack of approval. I simply watched and said nothing, because I knew. The more he was refused, the more anxious he would become, and the more likely he would slip. And I had already set up a silent endgame. Let him perform, and he himself would become the witness against himself. Night fell. When everyone was asleep, I sat alone in the helm, bluish light from the camera screen on my face. I replayed the clips of Darren's sneaking from the day and saved them to a second external drive. His face was clear on the screen, from the fake smiles in front of everyone to the vicious eyes when he thought no one was watching. I said quietly to myself, my voice low and cold, Keep playing, Darren. The more evidence, the harder to deny. The day I put this before everyone will be the day you lose everything. Outside, waves tapped gently at the hull. Aurora stood firm like a silent witness. I set my hand on the wheel, suddenly calm. This battle was not over. It had only begun. The next morning the sky was lead gray, wind from the open sea thick with salt. Weather like this frays people's nerves. Sure enough, Darren came on deck scowling, a cigar pinched between two fingers. He looked at Aurora, then turned to Melissa and said loudly on purpose, I don't get why your dad rented this thing. One strong gust, and if the control system glitches, will your dad have the money to pay for damages? Melissa's brow tightened for a moment, but she didn't push back. I heard each word like a blade twisting in my chest. By midday, I steered Aurora out of the bay toward deeper water, so everyone could feel a real trip at sea. The wind rose and the waves began to pound the hull. Charles stood beside me in the helm, a seasoned eye on the route. He had been a businessman, used to watching shifts, yet he could not hide his worry. Sarah and Melissa sat in the main cabin, while Darren, pretending to be idle, went down into the technical bay beneath the floor. I knew he would never sit still. I leaned slightly, pretending to adjust the chart, without taking my eyes off the small monitor by the wheel that showed the underdeck camera. And just as expected, he was opening the backup generator cabinet, a long screwdriver in his hand. I watched him wrench the connection screw on a wire, then loosen the bolt securing the battery. Every motion was slow and precise, nothing like careless curiosity, but deliberate. In the headset, wind and wave roared together. Then suddenly, pop! The lights in the main cabin flickered. Sarah startled. The power? What's going on, Edward? I kept my voice even. Probably temporary, I'll check. Darren came up from below at once, wearing a fake look of concern. I just checked the system. Looks like the generator's old and the connections are loose. That's rental quality for you. If it fails out here, will the father-in-law be able to afford the tow back? He stressed the last line, staring straight at me, eyes full of challenge. Melissa went pale. Dad, are you okay? If it really breaks, could it be dangerous? I looked at my daughter, my heart sinking. She still believed this was only a rented yacht, and still feared I couldn't cover the costs. I gave a thin smile without answering and signaled to Charles to hold the wheel. Then I headed below deck. The cameras had recorded everything, but I wanted to see it with my own eyes. Sure enough, the battery cable had been loosened. The fuse housing still bore fresh screwdriver marks. I sighed, equal parts angry and grimly amused. Darren thought he could corner me out at sea and make the whole family watch me helpless. He didn't know I had driven a bus for 40 years and faced hundreds of tougher situations. Engines dying on the highway, brakes failing on snowy days, so a bit of petty sabotage could not break me. I tightened the cable, checked the fuse, and in 10 minutes, everything was back to normal. The lights came on in the cabin, and Sarah exhaled in relief. Darren tried to hide his disappointment, but the corner of his mouth trembled. I wiped my hands on the oily rag, looked him straight in the eye, and said, Yes, just as you said, Darren. Renting things is risky indeed, but fortunately whoever breaks something is the one who must be responsible. And I leaned on the word break, my eyes never leaving his face. For an instant he froze, then quickly forced a smile. Oh, father-in-law, very skilled. I thought you'd have to call for a tow. I didn't answer. Inside, I knew Darren had crossed a line. He hadn't just wanted to insult me. He had created a dangerous situation, one that could have put the whole family at risk if I hadn't caught it in time. That night, after everyone slept, I sat alone at the helm again, backing up the new footage. The evidence was piling up. The trap was nearing completion. I whispered, eyes on the offshore darkness. Darren, you think you're winning, but in truth, with every step, you're binding yourself. After the generator incident, Aurora kept cutting through the waves toward calmer water, but the air aboard was anything but calm. Charles sat pensive at the dining table, fingers interlaced, while Sarah kept glancing at her son with visible disappointment. I just sat still, poured more coffee, pretending not to pay attention but catching every word. Son, Charles began in a low, rough voice, the way you talk to Edward is unacceptable. And Darren looked up, eyes defiant. Dad, I'm only telling the truth. A retired bus driver renting a luxury yacht. How is that not foolish? I'm just looking out for Melissa. But Sarah shook her head. Caring for your wife does not mean humiliating her father. Yesterday, and today too, you said things that make us ashamed. Your father and I did not raise you that way. And for the first time I saw Darren truly lose patience. He planted his hands on the table and ground out, Mom, Dad, you don't get it. Edward lived poor his whole life and suddenly throws money at showy toys. I can't sit by and watch Melissa get dragged in. If the boat really breaks, who pays? Him? Charles slammed the table, the cracks startling everyone. Enough! Edward has his responsibilities. You have no right to degrade him like that. And the air congealed. Melissa sat still, face pale, afraid to speak. Darren, for the first time, looked truly off balance. He drew a breath, leaned back, and sneered. Fine. If you want to take his side, go ahead. But don't say I didn't warn you. And instead of softening Charles and Sarah, that line stunned them further. I could see it. The light of trust they had for their son had fractured. Sarah murmured, Darren, you've changed so much. I don't recognize you anymore. And I sat silent, offering no comment, a cold feeling rising in me. Darren had fired the first shot into his parents' faith. That evening, when everyone withdrew to their cabins, I stood alone on deck, listening to waves knock steadily at the hull. Darren came up behind me, his voice full of challenge. Don't think my father's words mean you've won. I know what you're trying to prove. To me, you'll always be a lucky pauper. And I turned and met his eyes, my tone even. People don't measure a man's worth by the money he flaunts, but by how he treats others. And he gave a thin laugh and walked off. But I knew the words had stuck in him like a thorn. In the cabin, Charles and Sarah were still awake. I heard the whisper, "We need a serious talk with Darren when we're back ashore. This can't continue." And I eased the door closed, feeling a little lighter. Aurora was not only exposing the truth between me and Darren, it was now a mirror catching the cracks in his own family. Aurora docked at Newport Marina on a Sunday afternoon. The pier bustled with well-off families, men in white polos, women in silk scarves, children running with ice cream smeared on their hands. I had once hoped to bring Melissa here so she would be proud to see her father with a berth among equals. But today everything was the opposite. Darren stepped onto the pier first, shirt crisp, designer sunglasses strutting. He spoke loudly enough for a nearby knot of people to hear. "Look at Aurora. Nice boat, huh? But it's just rental. That old man there," he jerked his chin at me, "splurged a little so his daughter would think he's rich. A bus pension doesn't cut it." And heads turned. A few surprised looks, a few snickers. I came down after, quietly carrying a small bag, keeping my calm. But Darren didn't stop. He kept on, voice full of mockery. "It's rough. Poor, but hungry for show. When the boat broke," my father-in-law nearly cried. "Scared he couldn't cover damages. Lucky I handled it. Otherwise we'd be calling a charity to pass the hat." And some people laughed out loud. The sound hammered my chest. I saw Melissa flush, clutch his arm, and whisper, "Darren, stop." But he shook her off and raised his voice. "No, I want everyone to know the truth. I don't want anyone thinking I'm on a private yacht when this is just a rental stunt by a penniless old man." And Charles stood frozen while Sarah pressed a hand to her forehead and shook her head, desolate. I caught a few pitying looks from strangers. Someone muttered, "I thought he actually owned Aurora." In that moment, I understood. Darren didn't just want to humiliate me before the family. He wanted to smear my standing in public, to make me the clown of the yachting crowd, a man without means who dared to show off. My heart twisted, but my mind was ice cold. I stood straight and said nothing, watching Darren hold court among the onlookers, confident he had finished me. Melissa lowered her head, eyes brimming. She knew her husband had gone too far, yet stayed silent. That night, back aboard Aurora, the air felt heavy enough to cut. Sarah wept quietly, and Charles sat across from his son, his voice sharp as ice. "You shamed not only Edward, but this family. I don't know you any more. I require you to apologize to Mr. Edward now." And Darren gave a harsh little laugh and replied blandly, "I only told the truth. If he's really rich, why doesn't he prove it?" And that challenge dropped like a match into a drum of fuel. I sat and looked at him, then gave a slight nod. "Fine," I said, my voice low. "You'll have proof right in front of everyone." And Darren barked a laugh, certain he had won. He had no idea the game he built was about to end, and the price would not only be his pride, but everything. The next morning the sky was clear and cloudless. Newport Marina bustled as usual, people strolling, others polishing their yachts, groups of young friends snapping photos in front of shining boats. Darren was different. He sauntered along Aurora's deck with the same arrogant smile glued to his face, as if yesterday he had etched into this community the truth he wanted to sow, that I was just a poor bus driver renting a boat to show off. But I was ready. "Everyone, please!" I raised my voice just enough to carry across the deck. "I have a few things to say today." Charles and Sarah looked up. Melissa stared at me in confusion, and Darren snorted. "So you finally want to explain yourself?" "Good. Let's hear what you make up." I set a tablet on the table and tapped it on. The screen lit up with security camera footage. Darren sneaking around below decks, using pliers to twist the water valve. loosening the generator cable, wiping his traces with a rag. The sound was clear, the squeal of metal, the words he muttered. "Let's see how long this poor old man can hold out." The space went dead silent, only the waves hitting the hull. Sarah raised a hand to her mouth, eyes brimming. Charles clenched his fists, his face reddening. Melissa trembled. "Darren! My God! You—" He lurched to his feet, pale. "No, I was only checking things." I cut in, my voice cold. "Checking?" Wrenching a valve, loosening electrical lines, faking concern to smear me in front of the family. "Do you call that checking?" I tapped again. The screen now showed Darren stepping onto the deck and telling everyone, "With rentals, breakdowns happen. Not sure the old man can afford the damages." His words, his evidence, playing out in front of us all. Charles slammed his hand on the table. "Enough! Darren, you have disgraced this entire family." Sarah burst into tears. "We raised you, and you set out to harm someone like this?" Melissa collapsed into a chair, face white. She whispered, You lied to me. And Dad. Her voice broke. I drew a breath and took a folder from my pocket, spreading the papers out. The registration for the yacht. Aurora is in my name, Edward Parker. The purchase contract with the showroom on Lake Union. The figure printed clearly. $1.45 million paid outright by check. A bank statement confirming the transaction. This is my yacht. Not rented. Not a fantasy. Not showing off. I bought it with Margaret's insurance, my wife's, together with 3 lots in Kent that she and I scraped together since 1985. Everything legal and clear. I paused, looked straight at Melissa, my voice tight but firm. I have only one child. The only reason I bought Aurora and planned this trip was for you. I know you have loved the sea since you were little, and once said you wanted a place to find peace whenever you were tired or under pressure. I wanted Aurora to be that gift, a place for you to breathe, to rest, to be yourself. After this trip, I intended to give it to you. But everything that has happened, I swallowed hard. Everything has changed. Silence fell. Melissa sobbed, covering her face. Charles and Sarah sat stunned, their eyes equal parts pain and anger. Darren dropped into a chair, bloodless, stammering, I didn't know. If I had known then... So if you had known I was wealthy, you wouldn't have insulted me." I cut him off. "You respect money, not people. That is why you lose." Melissa burst out crying. "Dad, I was wrong. I didn't believe you." And I turned to her, gentler but resolute. "Remember one thing, how people treat you when they think you have nothing. That is their true nature." I faced Darren, my voice sharp as a blade. "You haven't just lost Aurora. You've lost trust, and you've lost your family. You will never win that back." On the pier, a few of those who laughed yesterday now stood, frozen, eyes wide as they listened. The rumor that I was poor and renting a boat evaporated like sea foam, and in its place Darren became the one humiliated, turned away by his parents and his wife. I lifted the half-finished glass of wine and looked straight at him. "Drink up, Darren. This is the last glass you will drink aboard Aurora." He stood, eyes blazing, but no words came. Melissa quietly gathered her things and walked after him, shoulders shaking. Charles and Sarah remained, gripping my hand. "Edward, we know you are an honorable man. We would like to stay. We're sorry you had to endure this." That evening, when the sun went down in a blaze at the horizon, I stood alone on Aurora's deck, listening to the steady slap of waves on the hull. I didn't need fists or vicious words to take revenge. Darren had destroyed himself, with his own arrogance and greed. I was left with only one wish, that my daughter would remember forever that her father once wanted to give her everything. My story ends here, but the lesson remains. Never look down on someone just because you think they are poor. If you feel for me, leave a comment with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe because there are more truths I will tell, the kind few dare to speak. Your support is the strength that lets me go on.